warm welcome to World Talks. I'm Salia Strzemska. Today we're talking about one of the most powerful books to emerge from the war in Ukraine, The Mad and the Brave, the untold story of Ukraine's Foreign Legion. It tells the story of foreign fighters who left their lives in the West to join the fight on Ukraine's front lines, some driven by ideals, others by adventure or a need for redemption. Described as elegant and terrifying, the book offers a raw look at war and those it draws in. Joining us right now is the author, Colin Freeman. Hello, sir. Delighted to have you with us.
Good morning.
So this isn't your first time reporting, right, from conflict zones. I mean, you've previously written about your own abduction in Somalia, in Kidnapped, right, about post-Saddam Iraq as well. So how did your past experiences shape the way you approach the story of Ukraine's Foreign Legion, and why did you choose this topic to start with?
Well, yeah, I've written a few books in the past, mainly about Iraq and Somalia, and I was covering the Ukraine war right from the beginning, from when the siege of Kiev got underway. There's a lot of interest in the Ukraine conflict in Britain, obviously, and indeed in most of the rest of Europe and America. But I thought it would be a good way of writing a book that would engage British readers and Western readers even more if it was a book where they were reading about the conflict as seen from the point of view of fellow Westerners, i.e., Brits and Americans who are actually fighting out there, because these will often be people that they can engage with a little bit more. And it's not just Britons and Americans fighting with the Legion. Obviously, there's people from all over Europe and indeed all over the world, and a lot of people from the former Warsaw Pact and Soviet Union states as well, including quite a lot of Poles, for example.
So how does the Foreign Legion sort of fit into the broader narrative of the war in Ukraine?
Well, to cast your viewers' minds back, I think it was on day 3 of the war, President Zelensky announced that there would be the creation of this Foreign Legion that would come and help fight the Russians. And he described it not just as a fight for Ukraine's survival, but a fight for the survival of democracy itself, for human rights, the rule of law and freedom. At the time, the eyes of the world were very much on Ukraine right at that early stage in the war, and what I think he was hoping for was to get some of the best foreign fighters from around the world, ex-Royal Navy SEALs, Green Berets from America, ex-Royal Marines and SAS people from the UK, and also I'm sure lots of competent foreign fighters from the ex-communist countries as well. And in all, I think something like 20,000 people initially signed up to go and fight. The numbers of how many actually stayed are hard to say, but in terms of the way they fit into the wider Ukrainian military, that has been one of the problems, is that because they don't speak Ukrainian, a lot of them, it's sometimes been difficult for them to be integrated. And obviously on a battlefield, when you're shouting commands, you need to be able to make sure that people understand them. But what they generally do is they attach themselves, they form usually slightly independent units, and they fight alongside the Ukrainian military, often doing specialist functions like reconnaissance or sometimes medical care and mine clearance, things like that.
But it has turned out to be quite a diverse group of people, right? I mean, how did you gain access to these fighters?
Unfortunately, there wasn't very much vetting of the foreign fighters when they came in. So as well as some very competent ex-soldiers, you also had fantasists and people who were making up their military qualifications. Wars tend to be a magnet for these kind of events. So you had a real mixed bag of people, some who were very competent, some who weren't. And then also their motivations were quite mixed as well. You had people who certainly they're just pure purely for the cause, and then others who went, I think, largely because they were not terribly happy with their home lives. They missed the camaraderie of army life when they'd served in the military in the UK or elsewhere, and they also relished the challenge of combat, the opportunity to fight against a fellow superpower army, because for most of the past sort of 80 years, certainly if you're an ex-soldier from Britain or America, most of the fighting that you've done has been against insurgent armies where you've held the upper hand, whereas on this occasion, they were fighting as the underdogs against the Russians, who had far more weapons and far more manpower.
Mm-hmm. And is there a particular person or a story that sort of struck you the most that you'd like to share?
Well, I mean, there's one fighter, a British fighter named Andrew Hill, for example. He volunteered to fight, and then on one of his early engagements, he was doing a reconnaissance operation in no man's land up near some Russian positions. And him and his colleague ended up getting in a gunfight with some Russians. His colleague was killed. Andrew was wounded in the arm and taken prisoner. And he became one of the first British prisoners of war of the Russians in a long time in history. I don't think it probably happened much in the past century at all. And he was taken to a black site prison, an unofficial Russian-controlled prison, tortured, electrocuted, generally treated very badly for 5 weeks. And certainly did spend a lot of time thinking, what on earth have I done coming here? Then eventually he was taken to another prison, a more regular prison, where he was held with other captured foreign volunteers, and eventually exchanged 4 months later as part of a prisoner exchange for some Ukrainian for some Russians that the Ukrainians held. So that's a pretty grim experience. And yet when I interviewed him again a few months later, I said, I assumed he wasn't wanting to go back to Ukraine, but he went back to fight again because he felt he was still committed to the cause, and also he wanted to, I think, partly to prove to himself that he could still do it, which was quite a remarkable thing. I would never imagine that anybody would want to go near a battlefield after the kind of appalling torture he went through. And yeah, it also proves that this is what happens to people if they fall into the hands of the Russian military. There is no respect whatsoever for the rules of the Geneva Convention.
Mm-hmm, right, of course. And what risks did you face while reporting and researching this story?
I wouldn't want to overstate the risks I faced while reporting on the story. We do visit the front lines sometimes, but we are not. There's the rear end of the front lines, and then there's the proper front end, and we are not too close to the real front end. Listening to some of the stories that the volunteers say about being up very close, right on the edge, where the nearest right in the trenches, where the next position along is a Russian position. It sounds terrifying. You've got artillery dropping all the time. You have drones flying overhead, of course, as well, which is something that previous generations of soldiers never had to worry about. They often say there are dead bodies of dead comrades lying around on the, often just 10 or 15 meters away, which they can't pick up because they come under sniper or drone fire. There's quite a few accounts in the book of soldiers having to risk their lives just to get comrades' bodies back, so that they can take them for burial. So my own experiences of Ukraine on the front line have not been like that. I did have one occasion actually where we were dining in a restaurant a couple of years ago in eastern Ukraine, and I took a phone call just as we were literally about to order food. Someone rang up out the blue saying, are you available to do an interview with me? I'm on the other side of town. We reluctantly abandoned our meal and headed off to interview them, and then 28 minutes later, I remember counting it on the clock, that missile, that restaurant that we were in was hit by a missile, and 14 people died in the restaurant. So if we hadn't had that phone call,
Was it
I would probably
Mykolaiv or
not be speaking to you
Kramatorsk, one of
today.
those?
This was in Kramatorsk. It was quite a well-known, it became quite a notorious incident. A prominent Ukrainian novelist, Victoria Amelina, was killed. 2 teenage girls were killed. It was in the summer of 2023. And yes, I was extremely fortunate. I walked away from that one just purely by a phone call out of the blue. I was lucky. It shows you just what happens to. This is the kind of thing that Ukrainians face, on a day-to-day basis.
Colin, I must ask you this because you've mentioned that these people, these fighters, come from all walks of life, and I was wondering, how did you navigate the issues of trust? I mean, their trust towards you, but also how did you corroborate some of their stories and statements?
It can be quite difficult. I mean, some of the fighters are very secretive and basically won't speak to journalists. Quite often they're worried about the Kremlin coming after them in some way, or tracking them down when they get back to their own countries. It does put them on the Kremlin radar, as it were. But most of the time, it was either done through personal contacts. You meet one fighter, you talk to them, and you explain that you're writing a book, and often they say, "Oh, I'll think about it before I give you an interview," and you can kind of do it at your leisure. And then often they refer you to other people as well. Some of them I reached out to on social media. Quite a lot of them have social media platforms where they're posting footage of what they've been up to. That's partly because they often seek donations online. These guys are often self-funded, so that helps them get donations online. So you can reach out to them like that. Then after that, really, in terms of trying to corroborate what they say, sometimes you have to take their word for it. Usually it's a good sign if the ones who are more believable tend to tell you about how often their battlefield adventures go completely wrong, and it's often a kind of comedy of errors almost. Yeah.
Colin, we do have to stop here because our time is out. Thank you so much for joining us. Much appreciated. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And thank you for watching World Talks. Please stay tuned for more here on TV World.